Earlier this year, Wizards of the Coast announced the Commander Brackets beta to some mixed reactions. To put it simply, this new system categorizes the power level of Commander decks on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is most casual and 5 is most competitive. One of the factors determining the power level of a deck is the presence of Game Changers, cards so powerful that they fundamentally alter how the game is played. Today we'll be exploring the top 10 Game Changers and what makes them so good, beginning with number 10, the One Ring. This card was released in the 2023 set The Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth. The One Ring is a legendary artifact with indestructible. If you cast it before it entered the battlefield, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. Protection is a keyword ability that means a permanent or player can't be blocked, targeted, dealt damage, enchanted, or equipped by anything of the described quality. Usually, protection applies to colors of spells, kinds of cards, or various creature types. Protection from everything is an incredibly strong ability, even though the One Ring only grants this for one turn. The One Ring also lets you trade life for drawing cards incrementally based on the number of burden counters it has. For just 4 generic mana, it's clear why the One Ring is such a potent game changer, and yet many other cards still have it beat. If you like MTG top 10 videos or other Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh content, please consider liking and subscribing, as the channel is close to 400 subscribers as of the recording of this video. At number 9 is Enlightened Tutor, an instant for 1 white mana. Enlightened Tutor is one of 16 tutor cards in Magic the Gathering, a group of sorceries and instants that allow you to search your library for a card and either place it on top of your library or add it to your hand. 4 of these cards are considered game changers and 3 of them appear on today's list, but more on the others later. Enlightened Tutor allows you to search your library for an artifact or enchantment and place it on top of your library. While certain card types, such as lands or creatures, might be more immediately impactful to some strategies, the versatility to search either an enchantment or artifact adds to Enlightened Tutor's playability, as does its low mana cost and instant speed. However, this narrow scope of card type does limit it when compared to other tutor cards, which is why there are 8 cards ranked above it. Speaking of versatility, number 8 is Jeska's Will. For 2 generic and 1 red mana, this sorcery allows you to choose one of 2 powerful effects. You can either add 1 red mana to your mana pool for each card in a target opponent's hand, or you can exile the top 3 cards of your library with the ability to play them this turn. Crucially for the Commander format, if you control a commander as you cast this spell, you get to choose both. It's easy to see why Jeska's Will is so powerful and so popular. At worst, it either gives you an influx of mana or early access to 3 new cards. You'll almost always get some mileage out of Jeska's Will, which is why this card has achieved staple status and why some players strongly encourage putting it into any red deck. It was only a matter of time before the tutors made another appearance. At number 7 on today's list is Vampiric Tutor. This instant costs just 1 black mana to cast. It allows you to search out a card from your library and place it on top. The fact that it lets you search any card is why it sees so much play, even at the cost of 2 life, a paltry cost given its coveted effect. Remember how I mentioned there were a total of 16 tutors in Magic, but only 4 were game changers and only 3 made the cut for this list? Allow me to demonstrate why. Cruel Tutor is another black card with precisely the same effect as Vampiric Tutor. However, Vampiric Tutor is better for 2 reasons. For one, it has a third the mana cost. 2, Cruel Tutor is a sorcery, which obviously means you can only cast it on your turn, whereas Vampiric Tutor is an instant. Interestingly, Vampiric Tutor was printed in Visions, an expansion released on February 3, 1997, while Cruel Tutor debuted in Portal about 3 months later in May. It's a wonder Cruel Tutor was even printed in the first place. Why be cruel when you can be a vampire? Moving on to the first, but certainly not last blue spell today, we have Fierce Guardianship at number 6. This is an instant for 2 generic and 1 blue mana that allows you to counter a non-creature spell. While its targets are flexible and its mana cost is manageable, it also comes with a sweet bonus. If you control a commander, you can forego this mana cost entirely. Since Magic the Gathering's debut, blue has been arguably the strongest mana color, with some debate among the player base depending on the format and the meta. One key reason why is blue mana's reliable access to counterspells, which have been a staple in blue decks ever since the OG counterspell from Alpha. While green can beat over enemy boards with big creatures, red can do enough damage to destroy a creature, and white can cheaply exile it, blue is most known for swatting pesky threats aside before they even hit the battlefield. Although Fierce Guardianship can't do anything about enemy creatures, it can interact with any other spell an opponent plays. It negates sorceries, instants, enchantments, or even something as crucial as a soul ring before your opponent can use it, so it's easy to see why it makes the cut. While you might lose your soul ring to an enemy Fierce Guardianship, it can't do anything to stop number 5, which can give you the same benefit at a price. Number 5 is Ancient Tomb. This land can be tapped to grant 2 colorless mana, but doing so comes at the cost of 2 life. Much like the 2 life cost of Vampiric Tutor, this drawback is less punishing than it might first appear to be. There's an old adage among seasoned Magic players: the only point of life that matters is the last one. While losing 2 life is not inconsequential, the ability to gain 2 colorless mana each tap more than makes up for it. There's a reason Sol Ring is such a popular artifact in Commander and is either restricted, banned, or illegal in every other format, even though this artifact even costs 1 generic mana to play. By the time Ancient Tomb's life loss will make any meaningful difference, you're probably on your way to victory, or you would have lost anyway. Ancient Tomb and Vampiric Tutor both demonstrate how losing 2 life can be worth it if the payoff is high enough. Gaining 2 colorless mana or placing any card on top of your library are both strong enough to warrant parting with such a small amount of life. But what if you had access to an even better effect that costs no life at all? At number 4 on today's list is Demonic Tutor. Another card from Alpha that has seen consistent play since the game's inception, Demonic Tutor is a sorcery for 1 generic mana and 1 black. It allows you to search your library for any card and place it into your hand before shuffling. It goes without saying that adding a card to your hand instead of the top of the library is almost always better, as it gives you quicker access to the card you need. For this reason, Demonic Tutor has been widely regarded as the most powerful tutor card, only legal in the Commander and Oathbreaker formats, being restricted, illegal, or banned in every other format in the game. While snatching any card from your deck is undeniably powerful, interacting with your opponent's cards can be even more so, which is how the top 3 game changers earned their titles. At number 3 is Smothering Tithe. This is an enchantment costing 3 generic and 1 white. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2 generic. If they don't, you create a treasure token. Treasure tokens are among the most universally useful tokens in the entire game, as a treasure token can be tapped and sacrificed to produce 1 mana of any color. Smothering Tithe's timing does allow your opponent full access to their mana, since lands on tap before the turn player draws a card. Still, requiring your opponent to pay 2 generic mana just to keep you from amassing treasure tokens is definitely a punishing game state. However, this effect is even more grueling against decks that like to draw additional cards, as this will give your opponent a painful choice each time. If they're already spending mana to draw more cards, this choice becomes more and more difficult, to the point that you might get away with some free treasure tokens just so that your opponent can conserve their own mana. Getting a kickback every time your opponent draws is a great effect, but not impossible to circumvent if your opponent has enough mana to work with, or if they're playing a deck that doesn't draw a lot of extra cards. Sometimes giving your opponent no choice is more powerful, as we see with Cyclonic Rift, the number 2 game changer. This instant costs 1 generic and 1 blue mana. It returns 1 enemy non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Not bad for the cost, but nothing out of the ordinary for blue spells. What truly makes Cyclonic Rift a game changer is its overload cost. By paying 6 generic and 1 blue instead, you can return all enemy non-land permanents to their owner's hand. Bouncing everyone's board but your own is jaw-droppingly powerful for a number of reasons. Most obviously, Cyclonic Rift is a great way to clear out your opponent's defenses to push for lethal damage, as they'll have nothing left to block you. It disrupts any non-creature permanents like enchantments or artifacts that they might have been able to use against you, and even if you can't push for lethal, the tempo swing from forcing your opponents to start their boards over from scratch minus their lands is reason enough to cast Cyclonic Rift. In the absolute worst case scenario, Cyclonic Rift is a relatively cheap way to get rid of 1 expensive creature, send an opponent's commander back to the command zone, or disrupt an early game Sol Ring before your opponent can ramp. While Cyclonic Rift's overload cost definitely changes the way the game is played once it's cast, there's one card that's deceptively inexpensive for both you and your opponent that takes the number 1 spot on today's list. That card is Rhystic Study. Rhystic Study is an enchantment that costs only 2 generic and 1 blue mana to cast, and its effect is pretty straightforward. Each time your opponent casts a spell, you get to draw a card unless your opponent pays 1 generic mana. Rhystic is a Magic the Gathering term that denotes this kind of effect, a card that grants you a benefit unless an opponent pays some amount of generic mana. Rhystic Study's effect might seem underwhelming at first glance. The boon of Rhystic Study is good, but not shockingly so. All it does is let you draw 1 card when your opponent casts a spell. If your opponent doesn't want to grant you that card, they can easily pay 1 mana of any color to stop you, or so it seems. The true power of Rhystic Study comes not from a singular execution of its effect, but from the accumulation of many instances. Remember, this effect triggers anytime any opponent plays any card at all that's not a land. At best, you'll get several free card draws from a pot of opponents unable or unwilling to pay this pesky cost for each card they play, or at worst, you'll seriously hinder your opponent's abilities to use their mana to its fullest potential. Rhystic Study is so beloved by those who play it and so maligned by people who have to play against it that it's created a meme in the Magic community, a simple 5-word question. Do you pay the one? For creating a game state where every spell costs an additional generic or has the added drawback of letting you draw a card off its casting, it's clear why Rhystic Study has achieved its place as the top game changer in the Commander format. Were you surprised to see any of these cards on today's list, or were there cards you were surprised didn't make the cut? Tell me in the comments below and let me know if there are other Magic top 10s that you'd like to see in a future video. As always, like and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh content, and thanks for watching!